up, guys? Welcome to the Son of Wonder Bad Batch Season 3, Episodes 1 through 3 have dropped, so let's conversationalize. Alright, guys, Bad Batch Season 3 has arrived, and honestly, I was super excited for this one. This actually was one of my more anticipated Star Wars projects of the year, and in a year where we don't have a lot to look forward to as far as Star Wars is concerned, at least I feel like. But I was excited for this one, and I think that these first 3 episodes did not disappoint at all. In fact, I think it was one of the more involved versions of this story that they could have told, because it didn't... This is a spoiler review. Warning, it's established now. But it didn't... Oh, before I start, you probably were wondering why my setup is so different. I'm going a bit smaller scale, but I will try to make this thing a bit more decorative. But all I have right now is this holocron behind me, so we'll see how this goes. Let me know what you guys think about it. I'll try again, like I said, I'll try to spruce things up a bit. But Bad Batch, spoiler review. It did not begin the way I thought it would, in the sense that in Season 2, it began with, big action sequence, the Bad Batch are trying to get something, and they're escaping these creatures and whatnot. I thought it was going to begin that exact same way this season. Even the trailer kind of implied that, but no. Instead, it began on a lot more of a simpler and subtle tone, which I really appreciate. I really appreciate that they went a little different with it. It begins with Omega, or Omega, as she refers to her own name, basically in captivity on Mount Tantus, as it's called, the laboratory owned by Dr. Hemlock, the evil Imperial scientist who is still very evil, very much a jerk, no less of one in the beginning of this season, but she is in prison in this mountain, and it's basically just kind of, the whole episode is just kind of going through her routine, seeing what she's been doing in this place, and just literally every day it seems like she's in her room. It's basically her cell. In the last season, at the end of the last season of Season 2, we discovered that the girl scientist who was helping Dr. Hemlock is actually Omega's sister. So she's a clone as well. And she comes into Omega's room and says, "Omega, we got some work to do." She takes samples of Omega's blood. Omega takes the samples to Nala Se, the Kaminoan scientist that the Empire has been using to help in their projects, whatever they may be. These episodes really do a good job of building out the mystery of that, what the Empire's actually working on, and it definitely is great at building the tension, because what's interesting is every time Omega brings a sample of Omega's own blood to Nala Se destroys it. And she tells Omega to tell, just keep it quiet, I'm just destroying your blood. And she doesn't tell Omega why at first. And Omega really wants to escape, obviously, and get back with the Bad Batch, but she does have some sympathy toward her sister, because it's her sister, and her sister is named Emery, I believe. And Emery's not mean to Omega, but she's certainly fallen into the trap of captivity in her own head, which is a very interesting thing that they explore a little bit with Crosshair specifically, as Crosshair's been a captive here, and Omega wants to escape and not leave him behind. She wants, to obviously take Crosshair with her, make sure he escapes as well, but he's not for the idea, really. He just feels like he deserves this captivity because of all the horrible things he's done. And it's a very interesting exploration of the idea of when somebody wants to, instead of really being captive physically, they're captive mentally. They don't want to escape because they're content being miserable. It's a very interesting idea, and I'm glad they explored that a little bit with Crosshair. But it's also a cool kind of lesson to see Omega be the one who's no, we're going to get you out. We don't deserve to be here. We're going to get you out. We're going to be free. We're blowing this popsicle stick. The episode also indicates an interesting passage of time. It seems like a pretty extended one. At first it starts out with Omega carving tally marks on her door wall in her room, cell, whatever you want to call it. And she is carving these tally marks, and at first there's not a ton of them, but then it passes, you can tell time passes, her hair gets longer, and the tally marks are all over the wall now. So clearly she's been there for at least a few months. And basically the whole point of the first episode is just to kind of really hammer home the sense of how truly evil the Empire is. Like, they don't want Omega to have any personal items or anything like that. Omega's like helping out this creature that they've kept there in captivity to like do experiments on, and she's trying to help out the creature. They don't want her to. Just this sense of this authoritarian nature, the authoritarian nature of the Empire, and they really hammer that home as if it needed to be hammered home any more than what we've already seen in other media, Star Wars media. But still, it's about Omega and her unwavering good nature, like her unwavering stance on, no, this stuff is wrong, I'm not bowing down to you guys, and I will resist you. And I think it's really cool to see a child do something that like some of the adults can't. And I feel like that speaks to a lot about children and the innocence of children, and how sometimes they can have more faith that good things will happen than adults do. So I think that's a really cool message for the first episode. Then you move on to the second one, and not as much happens in the second one, but it does reunite us with Wrecker and Hunter. And Wrecker and Hunter are trying to look for Omega. Hunter mentions that they've been looking for Omega for a long time. Echo's not with them. He's with Rex doing stuff, I guess, to help out the clones that have been taken captive by the Empire. And yeah, this episode doesn't really move a ton along, so I guess it has some filler in there, and I said in one of my previous videos that I did not want any of this season to be filler whatsoever. But at the same time, I do think it moves the plot along enough concerning Hunter and Wrecker, because, again, this is the first time we're seeing them in this season. And Wrecker and Hunter, I mean, obviously on the hunt for Omega. They get some information from the Duran family, which we saw in the first season. The episode we saw, it's the son, I don't remember his name exactly, but it's the son of the Duran, in the Duran family. They're like a crime family, like a crime syndicate. And the episode we saw him in the first season was definitely a filler episode, but I am glad that they at least made that episode at least a little bit worth existing, because he is in fact the person, the Duran son is in fact the person who gives the information to Hunter and Wrecker about where one of Dr. Hemlock's labs is, because they know that he took Omega, they just don't know where. And they go to this planet where the lab is, and it's like a jungle planet, and there seems to be a lot of there's like a lot of these vines, and like it just seemed like a very dangerous jungle, like the equivalent of the Amazon in Star Wars. But it's interesting because Wrecker mentioned a Jotaz, like this place smells like a Jotaz or something, and a Jotaz is actually the creature that was featured in Jedi Fallen Order. He was like a really big monster, basically, with claws and fangs. As per usual. It's funny, the Bad Batch seem to have a very consistent track record of running into creatures or something or other that just wants to kill them or eat them. Like, they've found so many of those, and it's honestly become sort of a recurring, like, I almost wish it didn't happen so much. The thing that makes, like, because it happens in The Mandalorian too, and it starts to get a little annoying, especially in Season 3. But the thing that makes this one a little bit more interesting is that throughout the episode they're being attacked by these vines, and apparently these vines aren't actually these natural phenomenon. They're experiments from the Empire experimented on these plants, and I guess they became alive or something and then went out of control, and so now they've infested the area, and Hunter and Wrecker realize that the lab is abandoned and it was apparently destroyed by the Empire to cover up their tracks. And so eventually Hunter and Wrecker find some who they refer to as regs, but they're clone cadets. They're featured in the Clone Wars, and I thought it was really interesting, this idea of what happened to clone cadets, because I thought about before, like all the young clones who hadn't grown into adults yet and become soldiers, like what happened to them after the Empire took over. And this episode, it kind of explores that, and basically the same thing happened to them that happened to the normal clones, where they were taken captive and experimented on. Or not experimented on, but their blood samples were taken, very similar to Omega. And there's 3 specific clone cadets in this episode that managed to escape the orbital bombardment from the Empire before the lab was completely destroyed. They were the only survivors. But I did like the fact that the writers even thought of that, like, oh yeah, what happened to clone cadets? it's interesting to see that. I like the idea, like these straggler clone cadets who we get to learn a little bit more about what happened to them, and definitely not pretty, but they did escape, so that's always nice. But one of the clone cadets helps Hunter and Wrecker get into the lab and access a control console that was not completely destroyed during the bombardment, and they get attacked by this vine octopus sarlacc creature. Not really sure what it is, but it's really scary. It kind of reminded me of the giant octopus creature in that attacks the Fellowship out of nowhere in the first Lord of the Rings movie. In fact, even before, as another reference to a completely different universe, the vines that they're fighting, like these sentient vines, like end up becoming like these spider creatures, and it was the creepiest thing ever, and I had never seen anything like that in Star Wars before. Very strange, but they looked a lot like the Flood from Halo. If you've ever played the Halo games, some of the enemies in the Flood look like they're like these spider creatures, and it kind of reminded me of that. It was very creepy and very scary. But they get the information, and basically they narrow it down to a sector of space where the lab might be, because they realize that Hemlock would have transferred his lab to somewhere else. Obviously, he did it, transferred it to Tantus. And so they at least have, the Bad Batch at least narrowed it down to where Omega might be, to this sector of space. And they agreed to take the 3 clone cadets to the island, to the planet with the island, the very peaceful island that they were introduced to toward the end of the last season, that they thought they were going to stay at and just lay low before Omega was captured and Tech was killed. And speaking of Tech's death, they begin the season in the first episode with like Tech's last words. It's like, when have we ever followed orders? And he shoots the cable car, and it causes him to fall to his doom. And it is very interesting. Like, they don't talk about Tech a lot in these first 3 episodes, but he's definitely mentioned, and you can definitely feel like a little bit of the weight of like, oh, like we lost one of the Bad Batch members, so this is like way more serious now. Things are way more serious, and I think they do a good job of like emphasizing the stakes. It's like there definitely are stakes. I personally don't think that the Bad Batch is probably going to make it out of this season alive. And if they do, it's not going to be all of them. I have a feeling either Hunter or Crosshair or both is probably going to die. And the thing is, if they do all survive, it's definitely going to be a little weird. It's like, oh, so we're ending the series, because this is the final season, season 3 is. We're ending the series, but what, like, if they all survive, well, then what happens to them? Like, are they just going to appear in another? Like, that's the problem when you overstuff this specific part of Star Wars, this timeline, like in between episode 3 and episode 4, with too many characters, is when you don't resolve their stories, you end up just leaving more dangling threads. And people end up wondering, like, oh yeah, what happened to this character? What happened to this character? So I really think this needs to be a definitive end for the Bad Batch in some way. They don't all have to die. I doubt Omega will. But I do think some of them need to, in order to bring some kind of finality to the situation. But then we go on to episode 3, and this was by far my favorite of the 3 episodes. This was what I felt was the most interesting, because it's called Shadows of Tantus, and basically the whole episode is basically the culmination of, I say culmination, it's definitely a large part of what the previous episodes about Tantus have been leading up to, and I found it very interesting that we were getting an episode like this so early in this season. So it makes me look forward to even more what we have in store for the rest of this season. But it's basically Omega and Crosshair escaping Tantus. But amidst all of that, we get the Emperor. The Emperor shows up in this episode, and I was really glad that we already have one of the cameos featured in the trailer. We have one of those in the first 3 episodes of this season. I was definitely glad for that, because I was worried that they were going to like save them all like toward the last half, and then we wouldn't have enough time to spend with each cameo, see how there wouldn't be any intrigue left. It'd just be like, oh, that person showed up and then they're gone. Which, I mean, it's definitely a cameo in this episode. You don't see a lot of Palpatine at all, but you see just enough to be like, oh man, what's going on? And it's a really big deal when he shows up, and he shows up to Mount Tantus, and talks with Dr. Hemlock about the experiments that they've been doing and the project that the experiments have largely been for. And so you have that going on while Nala Se tells Omega to, okay, you got to get out of here. Emery is going to check your blood sample. I've been destroying them. We don't want her to check your blood sample. And if she does, it's going to be even more dangerous for you. You got to get out of here. So Omega finds a way to get Crosshair to... she kind of just like forces him practically to escape. He's like, you just got to come on. And Crosshair's like, okay, whatever. I guess I don't have a choice. So he escapes with her, despite any reservations he might have about it. And again, it's just like this, the innocence of a child, like convincing this jaded adult to be like, no, you can be free. It's time to go. And I really like that whole lesson and that whole, the sentiment and the idea. But she escapes with him. And again, while this is happening, you have the Emperor talking to Hemlock about this project called Project Necromancer. And if that sounds familiar, it should, because it was featured in Mandalorian Season 3. If you haven't seen that season, I really do not like Mandalorian Season 3. I did not think it was a good season of television. But in the second to last episode of Mandalorian Season 3, I believe the title is called Spies, The Spies. In the opening, Moff Gideon, the villain of that show, is talking to a bunch of other Imperials, and this is like after Return of the Jedi, so this is way later in the timeline where it happens in Mandalorian. But he's talking about a bunch of these other Imperials, and the character Commandant Hux mentions Project Necromancer. And he mentions basically it in the context of, oh, well, we need new leadership. Project Necromancer is basically for that. It's going to give us new leadership. It's like, what does that mean? And they're also talking about cloning amidst the conversation. And so in this episode, Dr. Hemlock mentions Project Necromancer, and he takes Sidious, the Emperor, to this very secret, it's like laser guarded, like secret part of the base. And this specific part of the base almost looks like a Sith temple. It's insane. Like the Sith temple featured in Star Wars Rebels. But Sidious sees, like, they open this container, and it's clearly like a clone of some sort, and he's like, Sidious is looking at the container, and he says, there is nothing of greater importance to securing the future of this empire. Like, this is the most important thing in order to do that. Which is insane coming from him, considering all the other stuff we've seen in the comics, in the books, in the other shows, in the movies. Like this is the most important thing to securing the future of the empire, is whatever this is. Clearly it wasn't featured in Return of the Jedi. So the obvious thing that this seems to be is the clones of Palpatine from Rise of Skywalker. It seems to be leading up to that. At least that's the most obvious answer. They do not show what is in the vat, they just show Sidious looking at it. And again, they emphasize how important this is and that Dr. Hemlock's experiments have all been leading up to this. And throughout these episodes, they mentioned M count, which is Midi-chlorian count, and they mentioned the same thing in Mandalorian Season 2. And I believe it was in episode 4 of Mandalorian Season 2, where Cara Dune, Mandalorian, and Greef Karga infiltrate an Imperial base on Navarro, where they find some clone experiments, and they find a hologram of Dr. Pershing, the scientist, Imperial scientist featured in Mandalorian, talking about M count. And M count is Midi-chlorian count, which obviously Midi-chlorians dictate how, like how sensitive with the Force you are. And so whatever experiments Dr. Hemlock has been doing on Tantus, amongst other places, seem to be related to giving a person Force sensitivity. And they're talking about specimens and like the original person who had the DNA and stuff. And there's so many questions that I have, like, okay, are we cloning Sidious? Is there some other character involved that we're possibly trying to clone or at least get DNA from? Are we, like, what is our end goal exactly? Like, there's still a lot of unanswered questions. But again, the obvious lead up, the obvious payoff for all this is the Rise of Skywalker thing. Now, if that is the case, I must say, I would not be the happiest camper. If all of this, and really, like, if they're trying to connect Bad Batch and Mandalorian and maybe Ahsoka, And all of this is leading up to what we already know in The Rise of Skywalker and just being dumb. And it's like, oh yeah, Palpatine got cloned and there was Snoke and he died. If all this is leading up to that, that would just be the worst. Like, because, first of all, we already know what would happen if that's the case. Second of all, The Rise of Skywalker is stupid. The sequel trilogy is stupid. Like, if it exists, it ruins everything that came before it. So they basically would be solidifying, like, oh yeah, we're setting up the sequel trilogy. That's already happened, and it's terrible. And like by the time that happens, I feel like a lot of people would just be checked out. So if it is in fact Palpatine clones, I'm really hoping that they find a way to do something different, and instead of that plot line leading to Rise of Skywalker, it leads to maybe like the Legends version of Palpatine returning. Palpatine still shouldn't return, but if they do, the Legends version of Palpatine returning, where it was like in the books, and Luke Skywalker like fought the clone of Palpatine and all that. I forget exactly what the books are called. So we'll see. I just really, really hope it is not Rise of Skywalker. As far as the rest of the third episode is concerned, Omega and Crosshair do in fact escape on a ship, and they're being chased by fighters. The fighters are about to shoot them down. Then at the last second, Emery does test Omega's blood sample for the first time, and she finds that she said, like, it's kind of complicated how she described it, but it basically confirms what I think a lot of people have had theories about, and it's basically that Omega is force sensitive. So if they shoot down the ship, they will probably kill Omega, and they realize that they definitely need Omega alive. If she is in fact force sensitive, like the way Emery describes it is kind of like, the scientist girl describes it as like, her DNA showed a successful transfer of Midi-chlorian blood to hers. So I don't know if that does confirm that she's force sensitive. It definitely confirms that she has the potential to be. And there was even a scene in season 2 of in the last season of season 2 where she's like has this rock in her hand and she's like doing tricks with it and stuff, but it almost looks like the rock is floating a little bit at certain moments. So it seemed like she was force sensitive already. And again, I think a lot of people had theories about that, and it seems like this basically confirms it, or at least sets up the fact that she could be later down the line, because I think that might be what they've been trying to do this whole time, is mix force-sensitive blood with clone blood and see if you can get some sort of clean mix and create some new kind of force-sensitive soldier, or possibly clone of Palpatine. And Palpatine's blood might be what they've been trying to mix, like the blood full of Midi-chlorians, because Palpatine is so powerful. That his blood might be the blood that they've been trying to mix with the clones. So again, I'm not entirely clear on the whole situation. All I know is Omega and Crosshair have escaped, and it's going to be interesting to see if Hunter and Wrecker will be able to find, like if they find Tantus but then realize, oh, Omega's gone, we need to go find her, like she's not here anymore. Because they only just now narrowed it down to the sector that Tantus is in. And so if they're like trying to find Tantus this whole time, then they find him, it's going to be like, oh, dang, Omega's not there. But I have a feeling that all the bounty hunters featured in the trailer for Bad Batch Season 3 is going to come into play. Now, like, the Empire is definitely going to be sending as many different kinds of soldiers and bounty hunters as they can to find Omega, because now they realize that she's force sensitive. The most interesting thing to me is that they didn't know she was force sensitive already, or they didn't know, again, that she could have the potential to be. But Nala Se did, and that would mean that Nala Se, like, she knew about Omega's potential this whole time, and she possibly implemented that part of her into her when they created Omega. So, but like, it was weird that Palpatine wouldn't know. So, unless that was an experiment that Nala Se just wanted to do herself. I mean, they kind of go into it a little bit in Season 6 of the Clone Wars, where they talk about how Dooku kind of manipulated the creation of the clone army and had like a sort of an alliance with the Kaminoans already, unbeknownst to the Jedi and the Republic. So it seems like, yeah, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions, like, did Nala Se do this on her own? Was she tasked by someone else? How exactly does this work? How does Omega have the powers that she does, or the potential to have the powers that she could? and the Empire not know about it? That's my main question. So we will see for now, but I did think that these first 3 episodes were very interesting, very compelling. The music was really good, as always. And again, I think Dave Filoni and Star Wars animation is top tier. I think that live action as of late has definitely lacked in certain areas. I still liked Ahsoka, but I do acknowledge that it definitely had some flaws. So we will see for now. I am excited, obviously, to see where things go, and I'm definitely invested and intrigued by the story that we have so far, and glad that these first 3 episodes definitely moved the plot along. It wasn't just filler. We didn't stop somewhere and stay there. We just were going. The whole time, we were going. We were accomplishing something, whether it was Hunter and Wrecker getting closer to finding Omega, or if it was Omega escaping with Crosshair. We were finding something. Really glad for that. It's probably how Ventress will play into all of this, too, is that she'll be one of the bounty hunters hunting the Bad Batch, or hunting Omega, trying to find her for the Empire. And again, I'm excited to see how all this plays out. But thank you guys for watching. Have a very blessed day. May the Lord be with you. May the Force be with you. Goodbye. And that's a wrap.